In this video, we'll take a quick tour of Unreal Engine's editor window. I'll say at the outset here that it can feel kind of intimidating the first time that you open the program because there are so many different buttons. There are so many millions of things you can do with the program. It can be hard to know where to start sometimes. But the truth is that we will only use a small subset of the features in Unreal Engine. And because of that, I think you'll gain a pretty quick intuitive understanding of the program with some practice. The first thing we need to be able to do in the program is move around our camera. And the way that we can do that is by holding down the right mouse button and dragging the mouse. And so that changes our direction that we're looking. If we want to move forward, we can press W. Backward is S, A to the left, D to the right. And so by using these keys in combination, we can fly through our scene. Now, if you ever find that your camera is moving too quickly or too slowly, you can change the camera speed up here. Set it to be different than it is by default. Let's look at some of the menu buttons up here. I think you'll find that File, the options that we have under here are like what you'll see in other programs for opening and saving projects and importing things. Edit has copy, paste, duplicate buttons like that. Also, our editor preferences and project settings is here under Edit. Under Window, we have different kinds of windows that can be brought in to be docked in our workspace. So if we go to under Developer Tools and we go to Merge Actors, this is a button we'll use later in the semester. Note that by default, my Merge Actors window shows up here as a tab along with the Mode button. But we can move this any other place that we might want to put it. So we have a lot of flexibility in Unreal to customize our workspace to be how we want it. Now, if we go into this left top menu here, we can see that we have 5 different options. If we just look at the leftmost button, the Place button, you can see that by clicking on some of these sub items here, we can bring in basic kinds of starter items. And so under, if we go to Mode and Basic, we can grab a sphere and drag that into our scene. And then by grabbing that blue arrow, we can drag that to be up in space. Or we could bring a light into our scene by clicking here, grabbing point light, and dragging that into the scene. And there are a lot of different other options that we'll cover later on as we need them. If we look at the top menu, we can skip over some of these buttons. I'll just touch on a couple. Datasmith is a button that we will use later this semester to import a geometry. Blueprint is a place we could click on this button to change some of the code that governs the way that the level works. If we go over to Build, this button can be used to apply some changes that we've made to the lighting. We'll cover this later on. Play, we already talked about. This button is a way for us to simulate the game in VR mode, or there are other ways of looking at our project as well. If we look over in the right top button, top area here, we have the World Outliner. So any geometry that has been brought into the project, any lights, any other blueprints or anything will show up here in the World Outliner if they're in our project. And note that we have these folders that can be expanded or contracted depending on how you want to set things up. And you can make new folders if you want to by right-clicking, Create Folder. You can call it whatever you want, and then you can drag things into the folder if you want to keep things organized. Oops, let me undo that. If we look down in the bottom right, and let me click on this sphere, this details area will show us a lot of information about the item that is selected. So the scale of this sphere right now is set as 1, 1, 1. We could change this to be bigger. So if I just change this to 2. Note that the lock button is turned on, which will keep uniform scale. You can see that the sphere is now twice as big. If we were to double click on this static mesh little icon here. This brings up the geometry that makes up this sphere so that we could go in, for example, and modify the collision volume that lets this thing interact with other objects in the space. Or if we go down to the materials button, click on this. This brings up the blueprint that sets up how the materials are going to display. If we scroll down to physics, it's possible in Unreal Engine to give real-world physics properties to objects just by clicking on this button. And so what that does basically is it just makes it so that this object now will behave as if gravity is going to act on it. Actually, let me show you what happens with that button unchecked. I'm going to change this to simulate mode to play that way, which will just show us in our viewport what's going to happen with our stuff when the game begins play. So if I stop now, you can see that sphere didn't move at all. Let me click on it again, though, and turn on Simulate Physics and click play. And you can see it drops just as if it were falling in real life. There are a lot of other options here: collision, lighting, rendering, etc. I think we can skip over this for now. Just be aware that there are a lot of other things that we could change about our object by looking at some of the sub-items there. And if you look in the bottom left menu, this is the content browser. Now, yours might look like this by default. If you want to expand it to show this sort of hierarchical structure of the folders, you can do that just by clicking on this top left button here. Now, you might not see everything that I see here. I have already clicked on, what is it, show engine content. I may have also checked show developer content. So if you don't see the same stuff that I'm showing in the demo here, just make sure that you have these boxes checked. Now, if we go to under content, go down to virtual reality BP and click on maps, the motion controller map that we set to be the default that opens with the game is this one. So just note that this is where these things are stored. If we go and click on blueprints here and double click on BP pickup cube, this is the logic that defines the way that those blue cubes that we picked up in our previous demo, these blue cubes up here, it defines how those things should act. So I'm not going to get into the details of it, but just know that it is possible to modify the logic of the game by opening up some of these blueprints.